So I would back up, and when I backed up, right, he would take his hands off, but then he would spread his arms out. And he had like a 7-foot wingspan. Dennis Johnson, finals MVP, 20-point scorer. Look him up. Dennis Johnson, DJ, miss you, love you.
Horrifying end. That is the only way to describe what happened to Dennis Johnson on February 22nd, 2007. A man who had spent his entire life building something real, something lasting, something that made grown men stop and say they had never seen anyone quite like him, dropped without warning, without a goodbye, without a single sign that anything was wrong. He was 52 years old. He was laughing minutes before it happened, and the world was told a version of the story that did not quite tell the whole truth. But here is what nobody talks about enough. Before the collapse, before the confusion, before the grief that hit Boston and Seattle and every locker room where people knew him, there was a man who had quietly become one of the greatest to ever lace up a pair of sneakers. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, not the one with the highlight reel that got played on repeat, but the one the best players in the world trusted when everything was on the line. This is the story they should have told. This is the story Dennis Johnson deserved. If you are already feeling this, go ahead and give hype to this video right now. Dennis Johnson's story is one that needs to be heard, and the hype button is right there for a reason. Dennis Johnson grew up in Compton, California. He was not a highly recruited prospect. He did not come out of a powerhouse program. He went to Los Angeles Harbor College before landing at Pepperdine. The NBA was not supposed to happen for a kid like him, and yet it did, because talent that real has a way of surfacing no matter what stands in front of it. The Seattle Supersonics selected him in the second round of the 1976 draft. Second round. Let that sit with you. A second-round pick who 3 years later would be named the NBA Finals Most Valuable Player. In 1979, Seattle beat the Washington Bullets to win the championship. Dennis Johnson was the reason. He scored 32 points in Game 4 overtime.
He locked down opposing guards on the other end. He was everywhere, doing everything. And the league finally had to look directly at him and admit what his teammates already knew. He was not just good, he was different. His style of play was not built for the highlight clip. He was a defensive maven. That is what they called him. A player who understood that stopping someone, really stopping someone, is one of the hardest and most underappreciated things in basketball. He could guard the best guards in the league and make them feel like they were playing in mud. Elite athletes, Hall of Famers. He made them work for every single point, every single step, every single breath. After Seattle, he went to Phoenix. The Suns were a talented team, and Johnson continued to sharpen his game there. He was still the same player, the one who made life miserable for whoever he was guarding, the one who did not need the ball in his hands to change a game, the one who showed up in the fourth quarter and made the right play when everyone else was tightening up. He was earning respect at every stop, and the respect was real. Then came the move that would define his legacy forever. The Boston Celtics traded for Dennis Johnson in 1983. And from that moment forward, he became part of something that basketball people still talk about in hushed, reverent tones. The Celtics of that era were built around Larry Bird. Everyone knew that. Bird was the engine, the leader, the player opponents game planned around from the opening tip. But Bird needed someone next to him who could guard, who could handle pressure, who could make the right play at the right moment without needing to be the star. He needed Dennis Johnson. What followed was 3 moments that NBA historians still repeat like scripture. In the 1984 finals against the Los Angeles Lakers, Dennis Johnson was assigned to guard Magic Johnson. Magic. One of the most gifted offensive players the game had ever produced. Dennis Johnson made it a battle. The Celtics won the championship, and people who were paying close attention understood that the defense Dennis played on Magic was a major reason why Boston lifted the trophy. In the 1985 finals, Game 4, Dennis Johnson hit a buzzer beater to win the game, a clutch shot in the biggest moment when everyone in the building knew the ball was coming his way. And it still did not matter because he made it anyway. That is a different kind of player. And then 1987, Eastern Conference Finals. The moment that became one of the most replayed plays in NBA postseason history. Larry Bird stole an inbounds pass from the Pistons and found Dennis Johnson cutting to the basket. Johnson caught it and laid it in to win the game. A perfect play, perfectly executed by 2 players who understood each other so deeply that words were not even necessary in that half second. Bird later said Dennis Johnson was the best player he ever played with. Not one of the best, the best.
From Larry Bird, that is not a compliment. That is a verdict. Danny Ainge called him one of the most underrated players in the history of the game, one of the greatest Celtic acquisitions of all time. And Magic Johnson, the man Dennis had guarded and battled and competed against at the highest level, sent a written statement after his death calling Dennis Johnson the best backcourt defender of all time. The best backcourt defender of all time. From Magic Johnson. And yet somehow, even with all of that, there were people who thought Dennis Johnson did not belong in the Hall of Fame. Not during his lifetime. That part is coming. But first, you need to understand what February 22nd, 2007 actually looked like. Dennis Johnson was 52. He was not retired and sitting somewhere comfortable collecting checks and watching old game tape. He was coaching. He was teaching. He was grinding. The same way he had always ground. Because basketball was not something Dennis Johnson did. It was something Dennis Johnson was. He had arrived in Austin, Texas in 2005 to coach the Austin Toros in the NBA Developmental League, the G League as it is known today. This is not the glamour circuit. The travel is rough. Late-night bus rides, inconvenient flights, small arenas, players fighting for their spot, fighting to stay alive in a league that could cut them tomorrow. And Dennis Johnson was right there in the middle of all of it, coaching them, guiding them, showing them what professionalism looked like by living it every single day. His record with the Toros was 39-41. Solid, steady, the kind of coaching that does not always show up in wins and losses, but shows up in how players carry themselves when nobody is watching. The people around him in Austin described him as a perfect fit for a league built to teach. That was Dennis Johnson, always teaching. He was not there for the title or the spotlight. He was there because somebody needed to show those young players what it really looked like to be a professional, how to study film, how to defend without fouling, how to compete on the road when you are tired and the crowd does not care about you. Dennis Johnson had lived all of that, and he passed every bit of it on. On the afternoon of February 22nd, 2007, the Toros had just finished practice at the Austin Convention Center. The team was wrapping up, people were heading out, and Dennis Johnson was outside with team spokesperson Perry Trevelyan. She told reporters afterward that they were laughing. He was joking about a parking ticket. A parking ticket. That is how ordinary the moment was. And then he collapsed. He simply went down, and he did not come back up. EMS spokesperson Warren Hassinger confirmed that Johnson was in cardiac arrest when paramedics arrived. Resuscitation efforts lasted 23 minutes. He was transported to a hospital and pronounced dead. One of the Toros players said afterward that Johnson had looked completely normal after practice. He had even been playing one-on-one before the collapse. No complaints, no distress. No warning sign that anyone around him could point to and say, "We should have known." That is the terrifying part. Sudden cardiac arrest does not always give you a sign. The American Heart Association is clear about this. Cardiac arrest is sudden, often unexpected, and the window to act is small. Rapid CPR and early defibrillation are what make the difference between life and death. Minutes matter. Every single minute matters. And in Dennis Johnson's case, even 23 minutes of effort by trained paramedics was not enough. Within days, a public memorial service was held. Former players came. Coaches came. People who had not spoken to him in years came. And by all accounts, the service was filled with more laughter than tears. They remembered his infectious smile. They told stories. They celebrated a man who had made them better, made them laugh, made them feel like winning was possible, even when it seemed out of reach. Think about what that says. This was a man who died suddenly, without warning, at 52. And the people who loved him most chose to laugh. Not because the loss was small, but because the life was big. Because Dennis Johnson had packed so much joy and so much fight and so much genuine love for the game into his years that grief alone could not contain it. The laughter at that service was not denial, it was testimony. Now, about the lie. If you came here expecting a cover-up, a secret, a hidden diagnosis that somebody buried, the honest answer is that credible reporting does not support that. What the reporting does support is something more frustrating than a conspiracy. It is simpler, and in some ways, sadder. The public heard the words heart attack and natural causes, and most people moved on. The news cycle treated it as a tragic sports headline and went to the next story within days. But the terminology was not precise, and the distinction matters. A heart attack is a circulation problem, blocked blood flow to the heart muscle. Sudden cardiac arrest is an electrical problem. The heart abruptly stops beating effectively. They are connected, they can trigger each other, but they are not the same thing. Early reporting emphasized cardiac arrest and noted that an autopsy was planned. Widely circulated, detailed medical findings never made it to the public in the early days. The cause was listed as not known, while the medical examiner's process was still underway. So when people heard heart attack, that was an imprecise shorthand, not a documented fact. The lie, if you want to call it that, was the sloppiness of how information traveled, the lack of follow-through. The news cycle that decided the story was over before the story was finished being told. Dennis Johnson deserved a more complete public record. He did not get one. And here is the part that should make every basketball fan genuinely angry. Not at a person, at a system. Dennis Johnson was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 2010. 3 years after he died. His wife and his brother accepted the honor on his behalf. In February 2007, right after Johnson's death, writer Bill Simmons wrote publicly that Johnson should have been inducted while he was still alive. He called the delay not acceptable. He framed it as a failure to properly value what Johnson had done, especially on defense. And when the 2010 announcement finally came, local reporting called it a travesty that Johnson had not lived to see it. They said it took way too long. And when Bird spoke again at the announcement, he called Dennis Johnson the best player he ever played with. The best. Here's the lesson the delay teaches. When greatness lives in defense, in winning plays, in making other people better, the system is slower to recognize it. Box scores do not capture what Dennis Johnson did. Points, rebounds, assists, those numbers do not tell you how many times an opposing guard gave up a drive because he knew who was waiting for him. The Hall of Fame takes longer when the greatness is quiet. Dennis Johnson's greatness was quiet, and it cost him the honor while he was still alive to hold it. He never got to stand at that podium. He never got to hold the trophy and look out at the crowd and hear his name called the way it deserved to be called. His wife stood there instead. His brother stood there, and everyone in that room knew the wrong person was holding the plaque. But this is where the story turns, because his legacy is not a story of loss. His legacy is a story of permanence. On December 13th, 1991, the Boston Celtics retired Dennis Johnson's number 3. It went up to the rafters of the Garden, where it hangs today, alongside the names of the greatest players in franchise history. Number 3, permanent, and the Developmental League. The same league where he spent his final season coaching young players who were trying to make it, now gives out the Dennis Johnson Coach of the Year Award. His name is attached to excellence in teaching, in professionalism, in developing the next generation. Every year, the best coach in that league is handed an award that carries his name. That is not a footnote. That is a legacy. Dennis Johnson spent his entire life in basketball, first learning it, then mastering it, then giving it back. He never stopped. He was coaching developmental players at 52, doing the unglamorous, necessary work of building people up, because that was who he was. The man who Larry Bird trusted most. The man Magic Johnson feared most on defense. The man who hit the buzzer beater, caught the bird steal, shut down the best guards in the world, and then spent his final years making sure the next wave of players had someone in their corner who understood what it really took. Jerome Kersey died at 52 in 2015. A completely different medical situation. A blood clot, not cardiac arrest. But his age when he died is a reminder that elite athletic history does not protect anyone from what the body can do without warning. Dennis Johnson's collapse reinforced something the National Basketball Players Association eventually acted on. Heart health screenings for retired players, including advanced diagnostics like ECGs and echocardiograms, became an organized effort after a series of heart-related deaths among former players. Johnson's death was part of a broader reckoning with the fact that basketball careers end, but cardiovascular risk does not. If you take one thing from this story that you carry with you, let it be this. Sudden cardiac arrest does not always announce itself. The person next to you can be laughing about a parking ticket and be gone 60 seconds later. CPR matters. Defibrillation matters. Knowing what to do in those first few minutes matters more than most people realize until it is too late. Dennis Johnson knew what it meant to compete when the moment was biggest. He knew what it meant to win without needing credit. He knew what it meant to give the game more than he ever took from it. And he did all of it without asking for a parade. The Hall of Fame came 3 years too late. The recognition of how great he truly was came even later than that for most casual fans. But the banner is up. The award carries his name. And anyone who watches the 1987 Bird steal, or the 1984 Finals, or the 1979 championship knows exactly what they are looking at. A champion. A defender, a teacher, a man who made Larry Bird better, which is one of the hardest things anyone in basketball history ever did. A man who walked into a developmental gym at 52 with the same intensity he had in the 1984 Finals, because that was the only way he knew how to operate. Dennis Johnson never coasted, not once. He played hard, coached hard, and cared deeply about the people around him. That is rare at any level. It is almost unheard of at the level he reached. So here is the question to end on. Is Dennis Johnson the most underrated player in NBA history? Drop your answer in the comments below. If this story hit you the way it should have, give it a like, share it with someone who loves basketball, and subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. Dennis Johnson spent his whole life making sure people around him were better. The least we can do is make sure people remember his name.